All right, well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Tess from the Napa County Library. Let me just add one more person. Okay, as Veterans Day approaches on November 11th, our minds turn towards times of war and those that sacrificed for them in ways both big and small. World War II is an extremely tumultuous time for our country, but how did it affect the Napa Valley in particular? Local historian Rebecca Yerger is here to answer that question. So we ask you to please mute yourselves during the presentation so that everyone can hear and not be disturbed by background noise. There will be time for a short Q&A after, so you can type your question in the right-hand chat box, or you can press reactions at the bottom and raise your hand, and we'll get to it after the presentation. This program will be recorded and available to view on the library's YouTube channel. So now I'll hand it over to Rebecca for From Frank Sinatra to Military Tragedies, the people and events of World War II in Napa County.
All right, thank you, Tess. And welcome everyone. I will get this started, the PowerPoint. And oops, I'm not coming up. Hang on. I just dropped off, I think. The technical difficulty is myself. There we go. And here we go. Try this again. There we go, for starters. And I'm going to minimize myself so that way you can see more of the presentation. There we go. Oh, back it up. Okay. And here I go. There we go. All right. As Tess said, welcome to From Frank Sinatra to Military Tragedies, the people and events of World War II in Napa County, presented by myself, Rebecca Yerger. And welcome to all of you. And I want to thank Tess and the library for the opportunity to make this program possible. And also Napa County Landmarks and the president, Ernie Schlobbaum, for allowing me to use their office. And also Annie Schaefer, who helped me find some of the images that you'll be seeing. And of course, you for participating in this program. So thank you. And by the way, this is the old Hess Winery. It's, well, it's actually the Hess Winery, Hess Collection. And it's up in the Mount Veeder area by the Mount LaSalle, which is the old Christian Brothers retreat area. And I wanted to tell you that things weren't always as tumultuous. I thought I'd start with more exciting and jubilant times before the realities of the world descended upon Napa. And things were already starting to boil over in the European countries prior to 1940. But most Napans were turning their attentions to when RKO Pictures and its crew and superstar cast of Carole Lombard and Charles Laughton arrived in the summer of 1940 to film They Knew What They Wanted. It was quite an experience, especially for when Lombard's husband, Clark Gable, arrived in town to visit Carole. All this glamour distracted Napans, and it was the first along this time, this summer, actually a little bit later, October 29th, 1940, the first peacetime U.S. military draft began. And as a side note, thank you, Tess, for arranging for the list of those who died in the line of service during World War II. And I just tallied the numbers, and it was 80 locals, Napa County residents, who died during World War II in the line of action. Anyway, and there's some irony to this, as far as this movie, They Knew What They Wanted, Carole Lombard, the draft, and those that died in service to the country, this country. When Napa was its locale, it was one of Lombard's last films. She would have been, she was killed in a plane crash as she was touring the country to promote U.S. war bond sales. And I do believe that was in 42 when she was killed. So you remember there was a very significant day in our history, in Americans' history, that propelled us into fighting during World War II. And that day was December 7th, 1941. And it was when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. It crippled the U.S. Pacific Fleet. And there were 2,344 U.S. soldiers that were lost as a result of that bombing. And, you know, that was for those that were around at that time, I mean, obviously this was very impactful. And also President FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and his speech was something that they will always remember. It's called the Day of Infamy speech. And there were three long ago Napa High School students. They were friends. Two of the three are still alive. And I had an opportunity to speak to all three of them about 3 years ago, probably like 3 years ago. And their names are or were Ruth Heinz Richmond, Bob Zeller, and the late Jim Majetti. They all recalled that day very vividly. That's December 7th, where they were and when they heard about the news of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. They said it was gut-wrenching. Jim Majetti, he had worked a late shift the night before and he was asleep, and his mother came into his room. As you know, they were all high school students. If I didn't mention it, they were. So they were still living at home. Anyway, Jim was talking about his mother came rushing into his room, opened the blinds, and told him about what had happened. He immediately wanted to register or enlist, but his mother said, "Oh no, you have to finish high school first." Anyway, then Ruth remembered that she was actually in Vallejo at a movie theater watching some new release. She couldn't remember the movie though. And there was an announcement in the theater about what had happened in Pearl Harbor, or at Pearl Harbor. And Bob was actually out camping, and he didn't hear about it until days later. Anyway, one thing that they really remember is when they were attending high school, Napa High School, or Napa Union High School at the time, they were in class when FDR gave a speech, and it was being piped basically throughout the entire building. And they said it was gut-wrenching. It was unbelievable. It was surreal. It was hard to fathom what was going on. And it sent chills up and down their spine as far as the intensity of FDR's speech. And they said it was very galvanizing as far as people's opinion as to whether we should enter the war or not. Most people are now in favor of entering World War II because of the bombing. As a side note, both Bob and Jim served in what would be called the European Theater, and they both served in the Battle of the Bulge. Now, there was all this effort now to rebuild, strengthen, as well as to defend this country, its principles, but especially the home front. And some of it was the Office of Price Administration and Civilian Supplies, or OPA, was created by FDR to regulate wartime prices and supplies on the home front, which resulted in rationing. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. But also there was this formation of Napa County Subcommittee for Civilian Defense. And actually the meeting and all of this took place prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. But as you can see on the screen, Napa County was part of the Bay Area Defense Area number 5. And they were responsible for, as it says on the screen, general coordination of all types of necessary work in times of emergency, including housing, protection of water supplies, communications, evacuation of civilians, hospitalization, patrol duty, and fire protection. As far as the fire protection, the forestry department was part of that as well. But this was, it involved law enforcement, involved governmental agencies, municipal, such as councils, board of trustees, that sort of thing, and the supervisors, and fire departments, everything that you can think of. Anyway, by 1942, the reality of war were in full place and fully recognized, although there was a sense of humor that still remained. And we're talking about rationing. Hopefully you can see that, rationing from sugar to gasoline. I just picked up some of these posters that were used during World War II. I thought they were interesting. But also the local papers had a sense of humor about rationing as well. A January 9th, 1942, Napa Daily Journal article said, well, actually the headline was, "Does this mean Old Dobbins will stage a comeback?" Old Dobbins, the Dobbins would be a horse. Anyway, it goes on to say, possibility that deepening wartime rigors may bring back horses into vogue as a means of locomotion is seen this week in the action of the Napa Horsemen's Association in choosing a hitching post committee. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It's a fun little side note. Anyway, in 42, as throughout the war, rationing was a reality that would last into 1945. And they were encouraged, they being the citizens, the civilians, to not purchase things that were not acceptable as far as on the rationing list, to buy things that were higher priced than what was the set price, and to share amongst one another, and also, as this says, grow your own, can your own, as this illustration points out. It was encouraged to bring back the Victory Garden, which became popular during World War I. And that way it would increase the availability of fresh produce for the civilians, those on the home front, as it was said. The Basalt Beacon, which was a newspaper on the Basalt shipyard, or for those that worked there, lauded a local teacher and part-time Basalt office staff, Mildred Perch, for her outstanding Victory Garden and her rabbits, which she was raising for meat, because meats were also rationed. Now, by February of 1942, laws were implemented to mandate registration of enemy aliens and restriction of their movement. And all they could do was go from home to work, and then the commute in between home and work. And this is a quote: "They must remain at home from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. As part of this regulation." Also, another law was in place that all guns, shortwave radios, and cameras had to be confiscated from all aliens, not just enemy aliens. The enemy aliens would be Germans and Japanese in particular. But regarding this confiscation, Napa County DA Wallace W. Everett Jr. pointed out the ruling applied to any household with aliens, even if the home belonged to U.S. citizens. But a fun detail that came through earlier this year was a happier note: babies and blackouts. The Napa Daily Journal reported, first 1942 baby born here during raid blackout. The baby's name was Edgar Wright III. He was born January 3rd at 7:10 p.m. at Parks Victory Hospital. And that was located on Jefferson. It was probably it's on the opposite side of Jefferson from Buttercream, and about a block south, to kind of give you its location. Obviously, it's long since gone. But anyway, it also, the newspaper pointed out that it was the second wartime blackout here in Napa. And although there was a blackout, the medical team did manage to have some light available for the delivery of little Edgar. And this image is part of a pro-rationing, encouraging people to ration, accept the rationing as it is. And I just couldn't pass it up. He's such a cute little guy. I thought it would be a nice substitute for little Edgar. Anyway, as the Wright family was settling in with their newest addition, other locals experienced just how serious the civilian defense was about protecting the community and its water supplies. This is an aerial image of Milliken Dam, which is one of the 4 dams that is part of, well, now there are 5 or 6 in Napa County. Anyway, in February of 1942, the journal wrote, Napa County residents were given a clear warning yesterday to remain away from vital water district properties after a state guard sentry at one of the 4 dams fired on a man that failed to heed his challenge last night. The sentry was, had given a warning and it was ignored. And so this person continued to do what he was doing, which was roaming around the facility. This is a quote: "The guardsman fired. A man or several men were heard running off through the brush." And then Captain H.M. Hagen, who was the commander of this particular sentry group. This is a quote: "Warned that unless a person has a legitimate right to be on the guarded property at night and forewarns the guard, that person is," this is direct quote, "risking his life." So they were very serious about protecting our water supplies in the community. Now, one thing that a lot of people are not aware of, maybe some are, the area that is now like the corporate park, is the southern portion of Saskell. There's hotels, there's like the DMV office is located there. There's small or light industry businesses there. But it was Kaiser Steel for a long time. It was also Napa Pipe after that. But long before those were in place, it was the Basalt Shipyard. And in 1943, or excuse me, 42, the president of Basalt, there was the Basalt that was the company that produced like basalt blocks. And then there was this shipyard that was right on the river. Anyway, he received a contract with the Navy shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. This letter that you see here is actually from the Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knotts, I do believe his name was. It's hard to quite read his handwriting, but anyway, Basalt Shipyard was doing such an excellent job of producing ships as part of the war effort. Is you can read the text. They received an E Pennant, and it is an award of excellence. And it's a job well done. It's the highest award the Navy could give. Also, all those that were working at Basalt Shipyard, they received a special pin that they were entitled to wear, and it had the letter E on it. And it was a quite prized insignia pin to be wearing. And so anyway, we were very active in the war effort here. And this is the official raising of the pennant, the E pennant for excellence. And these are some of the workers. There were women workers, there were you call the Rosies, the men workers and their families. As you can see, there are quite a few children present for this special award. And if you look, there are a lot of people in attendance. Just look up on the top of the wall, that sort of thing. I'm not sure what building that is. And the Marines obviously were present for this raising of the Pennant. We'll go on. And this is one of the products, if you will, the Basalt Shipyard. It was it was known as the Basalt Barge, and it was for supplies, that sort of thing. But they also were allowed to repair ships that were damaged in the Pacific Rim area by the enemy, that sort of thing, or sometimes accidents happen too, like running aground. Anyway, so there was this big influx. Real quickly, this is Lorraine Streblo Consgard christening one of their ships, and the man standing behind her is her father, Albert Streblo, the president of Basalt, both the shipyard and the quarry. And I'm not sure who the two men are that are standing above them. Now, as I said, there's an influx of people from outside of the area to work at Basalt, the shipyard. And at the upper part of this image is actually the shipyard itself. And located towards the middle and the bottom is Shipyard Acres. It was temporary housing for the workers that lived outside the area. And, it didn't last much beyond World War II. I do believe by the 50s, it was pretty much gone. And it seems like, and it was built very quickly, but as soundly as possible. So if you ever hear someone talk about Shipyard Acres, it kind of gives you an idea where it was located. And, I talked about Rosies, Rosie-the-Riveters. I'm just calling them Rosies because they weren't all riveters. They held different jobs. And as you can see, they're working with their male counterparts. They might have been supervisors. I'm not sure. It wasn't identified on the photograph. But this is an embossing or imprinting machine that they're working on. And the identity of these individuals, the women included, as I said, was not identified on the photograph. Anyway, this is another Rosie. According to the Basalt Beacon, the men were at first resistant to the women working there, but they were encouraged, it was their patriotic duty to welcome these women onto the shipyard to help achieve the goals of the war effort. And once they realized that their jobs were secure, these women were not going to be challenging them, the men relaxed. In fact, some of them were quite impressed with the women that worked there. There was one woman who was described as a Arkansas farmette. They were really impressed with it. She was only about maybe 5'1", 5'2", and unfortunately I don't have a picture of her. And she was quite small in build, but she was able to handle quite well a 350-pound air hammer that was used in construction of these barges. And here's another Rosie, and this is a striking photograph. There was a strict dress code for the women. Of course, they had to have safety clothing for whatever job they had. Obviously, this particular woman was using what they called a fire burner. It was probably like a welding type of torch. And she had to have the appropriate glasses to protect her eyes. But all women had to have their hair up, and they had to remove all jewelry, including rings and necklaces especially, and safety boots, that sort of thing. In fact, the Basalt Beacon was rather amusing. Well, they said, we know that you don't want to give up your feminine attire, but you can wear your high heels and your dresses and have your hair down and your makeup on when you have your free time. But at Basalt, at any industrial location, you had to comply with the safety standards as far as clothing or attire. So anyway, the women did help achieve, filling the gap of the labor shortage. As we know, most of the men were off fighting the war, and so the women helped. But there was also another program that was brought into place. There's a Los Braceros program. The U.S. government recruited workers from Mexico to come help with the farm or agricultural needs. And they harvested, the vines, but actually it was the prunes, and tomatoes were also a very dominant crop here. So they were definitely helpful. And also those that were here, even though they might have had a job at an industrial plant like Basalt, they were encouraged to spend their spare time in the fields and orchards harvesting. In fact, a July 16, 1943 journal article said, the American Legion prepares drive for volunteer corps of workers to alleviate losses. And it was the Napa County Farm Production Committee appealed to the Napa Post via the Legion to throw their support and their work into the critical problem of finding some 4,000 hands to rescue a prune and tomato crop of 1943. A loss which would be a costly blow to the production of war's prime essential, food, exclamation point. They recruited every able-bodied resident. They promised top wages and extra gasoline for those who agreed to sign on as temporary farm workers or harvesters. And they even, they kind of did a guilt trip on the Legion, saying it's your patriotic duty. So a lot of people did sign up. And then the government went to extremes, not extremes, but thought outside the box for potential laborers. And this is actually as the war was coming to a close, which they didn't know at that point. It was an August 10, 1945 article. It says, German POWs brought into Napa County and set up at the converted Napa County Farm Labor Camp. And that was located along Silverado Trail near Rector, what is now Rector Dam. These German POWs were brought in from Camp Beale to Napa, and the officer involved, that was the head or director of this, was Colonel Walter Millis. And he assured residents, this is a quote, the Germans are not criminals in any sense of the word. He said they are regular soldiers of the German army and are cooperative and intelligent. These are just standard photos that I found of some prune orchards and the prune yards where they would dry the prunes. Now, besides labor, there were other issues, realities of war, which was the effect of the war upon the mental well-being of the soldiers. And there was an article in 1943 that a state hospital ward that was originally built to house, it was brand new, to house TB, tuberculosis patients that were residing in any of the California state hospitals. That was going to be the medical facility for all those individuals that had TB. But the US government said we need this ward to house our soldiers that, actually it was the Navy that leased it. They needed it to treat their soldiers that were suffering from what would now be like PTSD and other mental anxieties because of what they had experienced during their service. And it also went on to say that They would be cared for by, I found out later this was a beauty parlor when I saw the image larger, but kind of gives you an idea. This is at the Napa State Hospital during the 1940s. Anyway, they said that these individuals would be taken care of by Navy nurses and Navy physicians while they were at this or within this special ward at the Napa State Hospital. Also to help maintain the well-being of everyone involved with the war effort, whether it be soldiers or the civilians, there were places of entertainment. Now for the soldiers, in August of 1943, Napa opened its hospitality house to house and entertain soldiers that were on leave in this area. It was located on Main Street, and I do believe, based on its description, that it's that vacant lot that is right next door, just south of Cole's Chop House. And, it was at some point in time torn down, but they were of the belief that the hall should be used as a youth center in the post-war period. But I wanted to give you kind of an idea of where it was once located. Now, for everyone's mental health, the theaters and movie houses were open all day and night because people were working swing shifts. And this allowed them the opportunity to go to the theater, see a movie either before or after their job, their time at the war effort site or wherever they were working. And Madeline Ontis, who lived here for many years, she was a wonderful historian. She passed away a number of years ago. She actually worked at Mare Island, and she would say that she and her friends would go watch a movie, and whether it be at the Fox Theater or the Uptown, which I'll show you in a moment. Now, this is obviously a current photograph. Anyway, they would go like about 3 or 4 in the morning and to the movies, and then they would have breakfast and then get on the bus to go to Mare Island for their day of work. And she said normally they were too tired to do it, to go after. They tried once and they were all falling asleep in the theater. So I'm sure that was a common sight and maybe even sound in the theater, people sleeping. Anyway, there was another place of entertainment, and this is live entertainment. And it was built in 1941 by 2 local men. It is still standing and is located on North Kelly Road. It's where Kelly Road starts to curve westward as it, you might say, merges onto or with the highway. It has a rounded roof and almost looks like a bowling alley in design. Anyway, it was designed to be a dance hall and dancing primarily to live music. And frequently it was bands from either Napa or the area like Vallejo, sometimes Sacramento, so they were regional performers. But there are times when there were A-listers, which I will get to in a moment. But everybody was so wanting to have some escape and just have some fun that frequently the Dream Bowl exceeded its legal capacity as far as the number of individuals in the building. And they said that the cars were lined up along the street or the roadway leading to the Dream Bowl. And oftentimes people ran out of gas and they would just push their vehicle to the side and then hoof it, if you will, or walk the rest of the distance to the Dream Bowl. And sometimes they'd get a ride from someone else if they had room in their vehicle, whatever it happened to be, to the Dream Bowl. And sometimes the reason why is the exceptional talent that was performing that night. There was Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington, the Benny Goodman Band, and then there was Tommy Dorsey and Frank Sinatra. And this is Tommy Dorsey is the one on the left, and that is his band. And of course, you can see the backup singers behind the piano. And the one at the mic is a very young Frank Sinatra. Anyway, they said when Frank Sinatra performed, the walls were not literally, but to illustrate how packed it was. The walls were bulging at the Dream Bowl because obviously he was a well-known performer, even at an early age, and he had many admirers, especially young women. But even with all this, wonderful entertainment, the harsh realities of war hovered literally overhead above Napa County. In the year 1944, it brought a double tragedy to Napa County. 2 pilots crashed and died here, despite the fact that Napa County Airport had been completed as an auxiliary emergency landing strip if a pilot was having problems. The first pilot passed away on February 22nd of 1944. He was Lieutenant D.V. Clow of Ludington, Michigan. He died instantly from a broken neck after his P-39 Air Cobra plane plummeted into the highly wooded Lacoya Road area, which would be the Mount Veeder area. And he was separated from the 3 other planes he was flying with. They were also P-39s. They were flying over Mount Veeder, and it was snowing, and it obscured view where he was separated from his fellow pilots. And he ended up crashing into the vegetation, the tall trees of Mount Veeder. And as I said, he died instantly from those injuries, a broken neck. But the vegetation was so dense that it took them until April, they being the military, to locate Clow and his craft. And once he was located, they removed his remains and the plane as quietly as possible and as respectfully as possible. And there was very little, civilian activity other than maybe law enforcement keeping the looky-loos away. As I said, it took them until April 1944. It was reported in an April 14th, 1944 Daily Journal article. Joining that report was the detailed account of a second crash on April 8th, 1944. A routine combat training mission turned into a disaster. The instructor, his name was William W. Murphy. He was 24 years old, had 50 combat runs under his belt. He was from Jamaica, New York. His plane malfunctioned. It went out of control 5,000 feet above downtown Napa. And it was in afternoon, shortly after lunch, and it was very busy downtown. And so it this plane went into a vertical dive and spin. But Murphy managed somehow to maneuver it away from going into downtown Napa. I mean, he could have bailed out and let the plane go right into the Connor Hotel here and the other buildings that were close by. And the casualty numbers would have been very high in downtown Napa. But as I said, he managed to maneuver it away from downtown, and he ditched the plane into the Napa River. It was about 500 feet south of the 3rd Street Bridge. And he died instantly from a head trauma. I mean, when a plane goes into a spin, the G-forces and the inertia is incredibly powerful. And so the impact to the water would have been, life-ending. For him to survive, it would have been a miracle. There were vain attempts to rescue him, but they realized at that point that he had already passed. And then the military came in and removed he and the plane. And then a couple days later, this happened on a Saturday, the next Monday, The Napa mayor, Charles F. Moffett, and the council gave, obviously posthumously, Murphy a special accommodation. And they see this as part of what the article said. The flyer's supreme courage was recognized. He sacrificed his own life to save the civilians of Napa. Napa owes a deep debt of gratitude to this brave officer, whose heroism long will be remembered here. But actually it wasn't. It was forgotten by later generations, but now it's being recognized again. There's a plaque at Napa Mill about where the plane crashed. It's along the river walk, and it states clearly who he was, where he was from, what he did, and recognizes his sacrifice. Anyway, the mayor, Mayor Moffett, then directed the clerk, the city clerk, to send a letter of condolence to his mother, and that would be Mrs. Murphy. Also, there were other threats to Napa, which they were not aware of. On August 21st, 1945, after the censorship that was in place about things that were happening were lifted, the local law agencies and publications could announce that there were Japanese bomb balloons that had landed in Napa County, at least 6 of them. 3 have been found, and obviously 3 were yet to be found. And according to the newspaper, one was sighted in the Pacific Union College area, still with its load of bombs. We'll go on. So there was a lot of peril. You weren't always so safe. And this is the, you might say, the Ravages of War. This is one of the ships that was damaged and was being repaired at the Basalt shipyard. But it's, I thought it was appropriate for this. In 1945, things started to shift. Hitler committed suicide on April 30th. And the atomic bomb was dropped on August in Hiroshima on August 6th, and Nagasaki on August 9th. The war ended in the Pacific on August 14th. FDR died on April 14th, brain hemorrhage. And Truman, Vice President Truman, took over. Benito Mussolini and 12 of his cabinet members were executed on April 28th, 1945. World War II, and obviously the war in Europe ended before the Pacific Theater, and that was on May 8th, 1945. The World War II involved 57 nations, claimed 54.8 million lives, most of whom were civilians during its 6-year reign. As far as locally, here's some more. This is another, it was a mine sweeping vessel. And obviously, if you look at the front end, pardon my not knowing the proper terminology, you could see where it probably was hit by something. There seemed to be some damage there. Anyway, on August 17th, 1945, the Napa Daily Journal said, Napans celebrate VJ Day, Victory Japan, with noise, parades, and American Legion program. Napa, in the company of the rest of the nation, took off the lid on announcement of the end of the war with Japan and celebrated with noise, paper streamers, and undiluted joy. Although there was a little bit of damage, a few broken windows, most people behaved. By the way, this is the Native Sons of the Golden West building that stands on the corner of Coombs and First Street. Anyway, the article went on to say the Native Sons Drum and Bugle Corps held an impromptu parade in the downtown area. The crowd joined in with glee. So you can see it was the end, for the most part, of World War II. I want to add a little bit about 1946. There was a beginning of the Cold War in 46 when the Iron Curtain began to descend in portions of Eastern Europe. And but there was another type of legacy from the war. The U.S. birth rate soared from about, 2.5 million babies in 1945 to almost 3.5 million in 1946, initiating the baby boom. So that is part of World War II and lasts through other conflicts as well. Anyway, are there any questions or comments? I'm just going to scroll through so I can open this back up. Thank you so much. And this concludes the PowerPoint presentation. And
There we go.
Okay.
Does anyone have any questions for Rebecca?
Yeah, I've got a question. That Moffett, Mayor Moffett, is there any connection or connectivity between that and the name of Moffett Field in California?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I haven't seen anything. I mean, they could be like distant relatives, but I couldn't find a direct line.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, we all know that a large number of Japanese people were interned during the war. Was there ever thought of interning any Italian people of Italian or German descent in the Napa County or Napa Valley during the war?
You know, part of that law that I spoke about where they had to stay at home and they can only go to work and back. It stated that if you were out of your home during the hours that you were restricted, you would be forced into internment. And that was regardless of your country of origin, whether you be German or Japanese. As far as the Italians, I hadn't found anything that was directed towards the Italian community, even though Italy was part of the Axis.
Yeah.
Napa County had a very large Italian population, also Swiss Italian. So I think we would have lost a great majority of our population if they had been returned.
What happened with Dobby?
Well, that was, Mondavi came here, the Mondavis came here after World War II, I do believe, shortly thereafter. Or near the conclusion of it. So, but I mean, like the name Cavanero. Let's see, I'm trying to think of all the different ones. I mean, there's a whole long list, and there were, I could spend an hour just listing names. And in fact, the Cavanero family lost one of their family members to the war. He was serving in the army. So, but to answer your question, there was no attempt to intern Italians. But as far as Germans, I don't think that there was any internment camp for the Germans. They were basically under house arrest. And on the Pacific coast, there was more concern about the Japanese because of proximity to Japan.
Right, right.
But as far as I shouldn't say that. There was one family here. They were farmers, and they were interned. Not because of their refusal to comply, but they just were. The sons, who are quite much older now, they don't like talking about it. So I've never pressed them.
Wasn't there a German POW camp here, though?
There was a German POW camp, as I mentioned. They were brought in to be farm labor. And that was up by Rector Dam. It was the Napa County Farm Labor Camp that was converted into a somewhat of a POW camp. But I have spoken with people that were much younger at the time that said they would walk by and there was very little fencing. There were guards there. But these guys were so far away from home.
Mhm.
No, they were thousands of miles away. I don't think they had to really be concerned about it. And they might have welcomed the activity, being outside, being in the open. They were getting excellent medical care, primarily at the Veterans Home Hospital. And so, I don't think there was a concern about having them in like a prison type of or a concentration camp. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Any
Any
other
other-
questions?
How
No?
about comments? Any comments from anyone?
Well, my mother was a Rosie, she was a welder, and she has a lot of artifacts from that time. Is there a place we can take those to be donated?
Said his mom was a Rosie the Riveter
Oh, wow.
and has a lot of artifacts from that time. Do you know anywhere that those artifacts can be donated?
There is a Rosie-the-Riveter museum in Richmond, I do believe, and they probably would welcome those donations. But if you could leave your contact information with the library, I'd love to talk to you about that before you do that donation.
Sure.
If you- Okay.
That Rosie the Riveter is a national monument
Yes.
in Richmond.
Yes.
And they've got a marvelous, marvelous program.
Mhm. So that would be an excellent place to make that donation.
Okay,
Thank you.
we'll make sure we get you the contact information
All
for
right.
sure. All right.
Anyone else? I hope you found the program interesting and informative. And it's from a different angle. It's all from a local angle with, some, national, international. You can't help but mention that when it's a global war. So anyway, thank you so much. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. And I'm sure I'll be doing programming next year. Maybe it'll be a hybrid in person and Zoom. Tess and I will have to talk about that.
Yeah, we'll figure that part out. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to Rebecca for such an informative preservation. And also, of course, a special thank you to any veterans that are here today.
Yes.
Thank you for your service.
Yes. Thank you.
Check out the library's website calendar or Facebook for more upcoming events, virtual, in person, and hybrid, hopefully soon. Okay, everyone have a great Saturday.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.